This is a kindling blessing. The words come from the Camina Gadelica and were set into song recently by my friend Sheena McKenna. It's in Gaelic. Doki mi shantula marahokak mura. Toki mi shantula marahokak mura. Kaim Brìghde is fura. Sarantula saranlar. Saranarti hula. Sarantua lula. Amen. According to legend, Brigid was the midwife at the birth of the Christ child. It poses no problem for the Celtic imagination that a 5th century Irish saint should be present at the birth of the Christ child in 1st century Palestine. Imagination makes two worlds one, or more specifically, it speaks from the one world within all worlds, the eternal dimension deep in every place and time, and at the heart of every people and tradition. The Hebridean version of the legend is that Brigid was the barmaid at the inn in Bethlehem. The inn was full. It was a time of scarcity and famine in the land. Brigid had been given instructions by the innkeeper not to welcome anyone else into the inn, and also not to share food or drink with passers-by. She herself had only a cup of water left in a bannock, an unleavened oatmeal or barley loaf. Strangers come to the door of the inn, an older man with grey in his beard, and a woman who is young and beautiful. Her lips are red and her cheeks ruddy with youth. She has long golden hair and blue eyes, and her belly is rounded like autumn fruit ready to drop. Brigid is not able to welcome them into the inn because it's full, but she shares with them at the door her remaining cup of water and loaf of bread. The strangers move on, but when Brigid returns to the kitchen, she finds her cup of water has been replenished and her loaf of bread restored. Pondering what this might mean, she looks out the window and sees a great light shining from the byre, the cow barn. Rushing out, she enters the byre to find the young woman, Mary, in labour. Brigid kneels before her and midwives at the birth of the child. She holds him high in her arms to give thanks for the birth, and then suckles him at her breast. Thus Brigid came to be known as both the midwife and the wet nurse of the Christ child. I want to just say how important the stories are. Right? This is one of the main texts through which we understand the old Celtic ways. It's called the Carmina Gadelica, and Alexander Carmichael wrote down the stories and songs and myths of the people in the Outer Hebrides and Iona, and he travelled throughout the islands about 150 years ago, I think, late 18-something, and the tradition of the Celtic monks, they think, got imbued into the islanders and stayed for hundreds of years. There's a really interesting thing that happens on the islands, is that a lot of the people are very Christian, but they'll also be like, oh, don't go there, the fairies are there, right? So they'll have this dual belief system. Nobody bats an eyelid, right? You go to the woman in what used to be in the restaurant on Iona, if your back was hurting, you go and she'd lay on her hands and heal you, but you might go to the priest to marry you. You know, it's like it's this dual weaving, and a lot of the wisdom that remained was passed down through the stories and the prayers of the ordinary people. So the stories are a really big part of how we understand the Celtic beliefs. And I'm going to jump in a little bit more with Brigid because we are at this moment of Imbolc. Tomorrow is Imbolc Eve, and I'm in Vermont here, and I thought there's no way it's going to feel like Imbolc. But I opened the door this morning. It was like minus 25 or something last night, wind chill, Fahrenheit. Opened the door this morning and there was wee birds. I was like, oh, Bridget, you're here. So who is Bridget and what's she got to do with Imbolc? And why is she on Iona and why is she in Ireland? This is very confusing. So I'm going to give a whistle-top tour of Bridget. Okay, well, first of all, I'll start with some modern-day images. Bridget lives on in the hearts of many, many of us. Yeah, these are modern-day, I think, goddess take of Bridget. She's the patron saint of many things. Fugitives, midwives, all sorts of stuff. But her main three things that is to do with poetry and the arts and the healing waters in the middle there and smithcraft, especially silversmithing. I really love these images. I've purchased this woman's art. I actually use them as icons. They're really, really special. Helen Mask, look her up. Brigid, Brìghde, began her life as a pagan goddess and ended up as a Christian saint, associated with poetry, healing, smithcraft, cattle, beer, infants, fugitives, mariners, just to name a few. She's one of the three patron saints of Ireland, and everybody loves her the most. She's also the goddess of spring, the young maiden who saves the land from winter and acts with compassion to bring goodness and crops and healing and nourishment to the people and creatures. As both saint and goddess, she is the threshold keeper, the midwife, the light bearer. Bridget's face represents the invisible presence of spring, that quickening, that term that comes from pregnancy, the first time the baby is felt, like that first kick or whatever. I've never been pregnant, I don't know these things. But that quickening, it's not the arrival of, it's the first sign of it. It's that snowdrop. That the promise of spring is given to you. In Scotland, we call her Mary of the Gales, and even the Hebrides are named after the islands of Bride or Brigid. And she's the lass next door that's chosen by the angels to be Jesus' wet nurse. So what on earth is going on here? None of these stories seem to make sense to my modern mind. How can a saint born 400 years after Jesus go and be his wet nurse? The veil between what really happened and what is legend gets murky and misty, and we all claim Bridget as our own. She's our lass. She's also, for the Celts, the bridge between the God story far away in Palestine and the Druid world of here that already existed. And I've heard the scholars say that Patrick's mission in Ireland would never have been successful if it was not for Bridget, because she was the one that brought the people. She's a human figure that happens to tap into the between and betwixt, the sacred oneness. And she has all these beyond human abilities in the stories. But she's also very down to earth, very much of the people. Now for me, I think she's a great example about how a zeitgeist, a consciousness, can live on in the people in the land and be birthed into actual humans. The goddess Brigid is the goddess of fertility and fire. Her name means shining one, and her temple in Kildare in Ireland, Kildare means Church of the Oaks. Wherever you hear oaks, you know it's about druids. The temple in Kildare was the eternal fire was tended 24 hours a day by Vestal virgins. And a practice very associated with Brigid is fire keeping, usually by women. Traditionally it was women that kept the hearth, and the hearth becomes a very sacred altar in the home. She's also associated with holy wells. There's holy wells dedicated to Brigid all over Ireland. And indeed, there is one on Iona too, and we'll go visit it shortly. So Saint Brigid, who arrives into all this mythology, was a lass who was born in the year 451. She was born to a Druid father and a Christian slave mother. She was born just before sunrise. Her mother was straddling the threshold, and she was born neither within nor without the house. She represents the between and the betwixt in many ways, and also reaching across the divides. The story goes that her mother Brìghde was a Pictic slave who had been baptized by St. Patrick. Her father, Duach, was a chieftain, And legend is that Duach's wife forced him to sell Brigid's mother, because she was now pregnant, to a local druid. So Brigid was born into slavery. And when she was 12, she returned in service to her chieftain father and annoyed him constantly. He's always giving away their possessions, especially bacon and butter. And all these things would miraculously reappear in the house later. But she drove her father nuts. So he took her to the king's court and tried to sell her as a slave to the king. But while this meeting was happening, Brigid was outside and a beggar came by, and she gifted her father's gilded sword to the beggar. And when the king found this out, he was moved with compassion and asked Duach to release her as a free woman. So she is slave and free, druid and Christian, goddess and human. She is otherworldly, and healing and compassion flow from her. She lived in the druid and Christian time and was comfortable with both. Right, there's a tradition of a monastery in Kildare. Before, people said it was at the Druid Centre. The Druid means knowers of the oak, and Kildare is the Church of the Oak. And some say that Brigid was the Druid, the chief Druid of that order. And other people say that Brigid went there to establish two spiritual communities of Christians, one for women and one for men. It was an order that had abbots and abbesses. They were both on equal standing. And it's interesting because the Roman Church, we know about this because the Roman Church really didn't like this inclusion of women, and there's a whole load of accounts about the Celtic theologians, how they were always among the women and their spindles and their wheels, teaching them about the Gospels and teaching them to read. And there was actually a decree that some bishops in Rome gave in, what year was it? No, you don't really. 520, where they declared the practice of women presiding over Mass as an abomination. So clearly women were doing all sorts of stuff. And Brigid was, she was a bishop. Now there's all these later stories that try and explain away why she could be a bishop. But in that tradition, the Druid tradition, there were female leaders and male leaders. So what do I want you to know about Brigid? She's associated with healing and compassion and hospitality. And as I said, she's the face of spring, the one that brings spring to us. And I really think that it's a really natural response to respond with compassion and welcome to the beauty of this world. This painting is important to me as well, very important to me. I think that I didn't really meet Brigid. I heard some stories about her because the birds are named after her on Iona and things like that. But I didn't really meet Brigid until I came to North America. So before I came to North America, I left Iona and I had a year off. And I was a mess. It was a difficult time for me. And I went to this painting in my mind a lot. There was something about it. I felt like I was in the sea there where the seal is. That dark sea, that was what it felt like in my heart for a long time. And when I watched the video and I saw the picture of the scene without the angel and stuff, that's really what drew me into this picture. Was you can see below me, there's the abbey there. I'll just remove myself for a second. This is what it felt like when I left Iona, that I was caught in the colours and that I was drowning, and I had a real strong sense of the angel for me was the seal that was more than just a seal, and that it was what the forces of nature were keeping me afloat. And one of the things that I would do was I would go through and travel to see this picture in the art gallery, because it was in the National Gallery in Edinburgh, and I'd buy a train ticket. I wasn't living with money at this time, but I would use my savings to travel through and get myself a small coffee. I never did things like that. And I would sit in front of this painting, and it really brought me solace, even though I didn't really know who Brigid was, and I didn't know what to make of this strange story about our saint that was born 400 years later being taken to be Jesus' witness. All right, so fast forward in time, and I'm in America. It was about 2017 maybe, and I'm a minister now, and I'm trying to explain to a bunch of children that go to Steiner school about Imbolc. And they live in the Pacific Northwest, so it's the right climate. And I was online, and I was hunting for resources, and I found this blessing, and it had this tune in Irish Gaelic that went like this: la 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 la, la 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 la, la 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 la. La 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 na na na. And I was transfixed, and unfortunately the person that was using it on YouTube didn't say what the song was. And for the next 2 days I hunted and hunted, because I don't speak Gaelic. I couldn't work out any of the words. And I found out it was Sinéad O'Connor singing a song called Woman of Ireland. And in the 2 days while I was hunting, I knew in my heart it was a song about colonization. It was about people being forced off their land. You know, and I am living in Washington State and really learning about Black Lives Matter and colonization, and thinking about the fact that I'm a white man and I'm feeling so numb and divorced from the land. Why do the trees not speak to me here? And this song jumps out of YouTube and grabs me, and it's Brigid. Beloved maiden, sweet Brigid, you are the spring and new life for this world. Men may defile you, woman may banish you, but you cannot be removed from the soil. La 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 la, la 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 la, la la la, la la la, la la la. There was a moment you could not bear it all, and your tears fell to earth for all you saw. And on that hallowed ground there grew a fruit tree, with Eden's fruit brought to light through your tears. La 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 la, la 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 la, la la la, la la la, la la la. O wise midwife, threshold keeper, there's a harsh, bitter cold in these times, but in your tender heart there lives a beauty. It's the gold that fills the cracks where we divide. La 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 la, la 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 la, la la la, la la la, la la la. Beloved maiden, sweet Brigid, you are the spring and new life in my veins. What an amazing way to meet Brigid was that she came through song. So the melody is a rebel melody from the 1960s from Ireland. And then I gave voice in my own poetry to what I was feeling stirring up in the land. Now, an interesting thing happened, which was I was building an instrument, which happens to be right here. I was building a ukulele because I'm a sacred object maker and I like to make things. And as I was building this baritone, enormous ukulele, my friend's mother died, and he stopped being able to think very clearly, and he missed a really important step. So where this is bookmarked on the back, I forgot to put the tiny little piece, transition piece of cross grain, tiny little piece that holds everything together. So my ukulele split apart, and I'd just written the song in which I call Brigid, "You are the gold that fills the cracks where we divide." So you can't really see it in this light, but I replicated kintsugi, you know, that Japanese art form where they repair golden joinery. Now, one of the things that's interesting is that we see the gold, but it's actually the resin from the trees. It's the life of the tree that holds the object together, not the gold. The gold is just the bling on the outside. Symbolisms abound. So that's a wee bit about Brigid and what she means for me in these times. She's definitely a sacred presence that is helping me deal with colonization as a minister and waking up to the fact that I am a white privileged person and there's a lot of wounding and pain in this land, and that's the work of our time.